case of Jennifer Brown. Jennifer Brown was born in 1979, radiated positivity and warmth, impacting those around her. Her numerous pursuits often left friends and family wondering how she managed it all. But her true passion was being a mother. Despite having to care for Noah, her son, this has not negatively affected her life. Instead, make Jennifer stronger, especially after Noah was diagnosed with autism as a child. As she cared for Noah, Jennifer became his rock and closest friend. They spent countless hours together, sharing joyful moments and supporting each other through life's challenges. Their heartwarming bond evoked feelings of tenderness and admiration from those who knew them. The small town adored this family for their genuine kindness and cheerful nature. Tragedy struck unexpectedly on January 3, 2023, when Jennifer vanished without leaving behind any clues. On January 4, 2023, Antonio Blair Watts Richardson contacted the Limerick Township Police Department, deeply concerned about his close friend Jennifer's disappearance. Although it had been less than 24 hours since he last saw or heard from her, Antonio's anxiety was growing by the minute. Despite numerous attempts, he couldn't reach Jennifer, which was unusual since she was always responsive, especially when it came to her son Noah. Jennifer's family and friends knew her as a devoted mother and caring person, making her sudden disappearance alarming. Antonio's call to the police initiated a lengthy and mysterious investigation. A massive search effort began, involving police officers, family, and friends, all hoping to find clues about Jennifer's disappearance. The main question on everyone's mind was what could have caused Jennifer to leave her son without explanation. At 4 p.m., Officer Stephen Crawford from the Limerick Township Police Department visited the Brown family home to check on the situation. He observed Jennifer's vehicle parked near the porch. Upon entering the house, he found her keys, purse, tablet, and work cell phone still inside. However, Jennifer's personal cell phone was nowhere to be found. When police attempted to track the phone, they discovered it had been turned off at 7 a.m. on January 4th, and the signal couldn't be traced after that. The last known location of the phone was near the intersection of Lewis Road and Ridge Pike in Limerick. This discovery marked the first significant lead in the investigation and indicated that something ominous had occurred. As a result, Jennifer was officially reported missing, and the police launched an investigation. Investigators questioned Jennifer's family, friends, and neighbors, but none of them had any information about her disappearance. Her loved ones, including her Aunt Diane Bram and Jennifer's friends Tiffany Barron and Antonio, were adamant that Jennifer would never leave her son behind. As a devoted mother, she would never abandon her child. Despite efforts, no leads were found in Jennifer's disappearance. Her family appealed to the public and a reward was offered for information, but yielded nothing, leaving unanswered questions and growing anxiety. The police investigation started by examining the events of that day, focusing on Jennifer's close friend Antonio, who was the last person to see her alive. On what seemed like an ordinary January day, Jennifer and Antonio spent time in the living room discussing life, future plans, and their children. As their kids often played together, Jennifer asked Antonio to pick up her son Noah from school. Antonio agreed and headed to the school to get Noah. The next day, however, Noah's behavior at school raised concerns among his teachers. They noticed that he had missed 2 doses of his medication, which was unusual given Jennifer's diligent care for her son's condition. She always kept his teachers informed about his health and any issues that arose at school. The school staff became concerned when they couldn't reach Jennifer. Noah told them Jennifer had gone to the grocery store but hadn't returned. She would never leave her son alone at this time. Antonio also tried to contact her but was unsuccessful. Antonio reported her missing to the police. As the investigation continued, no new information about Jennifer's whereabouts emerged. Hope for her return began to fade with each passing day. It seemed she had vanished without a trace and might never be found. However, on January 18th, 2 weeks after her disappearance was reported, 2 warehouse employees in nearby Limerick Township stumbled upon something unusual. They exited the building to grab coffee and stumbled upon what seemed to be a freshly dug hole. Upon closer inspection, they were shocked to find a woman's body buried in a shallow grave. The workers immediately notified the police, who promptly arrived at the scene. The body was identified as Jennifer Brown, who had been missing for 2 weeks. The sheriff informed Jennifer's family that her body had been found partially buried near a warehouse in Rosefort. An autopsy revealed that Jennifer's death was caused by asphyxiation, with 3 broken ribs indicating violent struggle with her killer. The investigation shifted from a missing person case to a murder case. Police re-interviewed Jennifer's family and friends, but these conversations yielded no new leads. The investigation seemed to be reaching a dead end, with no suspects in sight. However, just when detectives thought they had hit a roadblock, an unexpected lead emerged from an unforeseen source. After Jennifer's disappearance and murder were made public, the police asked anyone with relevant information to come forward. Noah's teacher responded to this request. She remembered an incident that initially seemed insignificant, but raised serious concerns after Jennifer's death. The teacher reported that Noah shared an important detail about the day Jennifer disappeared. Noah told his teacher that when Antonio picked him up from the bus stop on January 3rd, he saw his mom's personal cell phone among Antonio's belongings. Noah recognized the phone because the lock screen showed his own childhood photo. This information proved crucial in the investigation into Jennifer's murder. Previously, investigators suspected that Jennifer's killer had taken her phone. Now, Antonio became the main suspect. The police started investigating the relationship between Jennifer and Antonio, uncovering surprising details. Initially, Jennifer and Antonio's friendship appeared strong and enduring. They spent a significant amount of time together, were well acquainted, and their families socialized with one another. However, once the financial dealings between them became known, one that had been concealed behind their seemingly friendly relationship. Antonio owned a restaurant called Bird's Kitchen, which had declined and closed in early 2022. Following this, Antonio sought help from Jennifer in August 2022. To support her friend, Jennifer decided to invest in Antonio's business, helping him reopen Bird's Kitchen in a new location. They signed a contract that required Jennifer to provide regular financial support to sustain the restaurant, making payments approximately every 6 weeks. To rebuild Bird's Kitchen, Jennifer gave Antonio approximately $36,000 from August to January. They agreed she would give him another $99,000. Antonio was supposed to find a new location, pay rent, sign a contract, and reopen the restaurant in January 2023. However, Antonio spent the money on personal needs instead of the business. As a result, the property owners canceled their agreement with him on December 26, 2022, because he failed to meet his financial obligations. This left Antonio in a difficult situation, losing both money and the opportunity to open the restaurant. The police suspected Antonio of committing a crime to save his business due to his desperate situation. Upon investigating Jennifer's iPad, they found 2 unauthorized transfers of $177,000 to Bird's Kitchen on January 3rd. These transfers were not part of the agreement between Jennifer and Antonio, and they initially failed due to 2-factor authentication, which was later disabled. This evidence increasingly implicated Antonio in her murder. Police interviewed the owners of the property where Antonio lived, who had recently terminated his lease. Surprisingly, on January 4th, the same day Antonio reported Jennifer missing, he had met with them, claiming he had the money to sign a new lease. This led investigators to believe that Antonio was likely the killer, but they knew he would not confess easily. They needed concrete evidence to prove his guilt. To gather more information, investigators spoke with Antonio's wife, Tiara Taylor. They asked her about Antonio's whereabouts on the day Jennifer went missing. Tiara told them that Antonio had visited the Brown family at around 1 p.m. on January 3rd and didn't return home until 4:30 a.m. the next morning, when he picked up Noah from the bus stop. She also mentioned that Antonio came home briefly, then left again around 5 p.m. and didn't return until late that night. This timeline became a crucial focus point for further investigation. Further investigation found that Antonio spent the night with his mistress, Tatiana Garrett, and didn't meet her until 8 p.m. This left a 3-hour gap with no alibi. Based on evidence, detectives created a timeline of the murder. According to them, Antonio went to Jennifer's house on January 3rd around 1 p.m. and allegedly killed her while Noah was at school. Antonio then transferred funds from Jennifer's iPad to his account and left to pick up Noah from the bus stop around 4 p.m. Later, he returned to Jennifer's house, dropped off Noah, and went back to dispose of the body. He buried it in a shallow grave in a field near Roseford. Afterwards, he went to Tatiana's house and spent the night. Everything seemed carefully planned, but one mistake led the police to Antonio. The mistake was letting Noah see his mother's cell phone. The police had enough evidence to convict him but investigated further to confirm his guilt. This involved film experts and a trained dog that could detect cadaveric odors indoors. First, the dog was taken to Jennifer's home to familiarize itself with her scent. This was the same location where the crime had occurred in her kitchen. The police then led the dog to Antonio's car, where it immediately picked up the same scent. This final piece of evidence solidified the detective's suspicions of Antonio's involvement in the murder. After months of investigation, Antonio was arrested on February 8th and charged with first-degree murder, third-degree murder, and theft. He is currently being held at the Montgomery County Correctional Facility without bail, awaiting a preliminary hearing where he will face the law for his alleged crimes. Jennifer's loved ones were devastated by her death, especially since the killer was someone they trusted. Now that the killer has been brought to justice, the case was finally closed. The boy's observation of the killer's mistake played a crucial role in uncovering the truth and bringing the perpetrator to justice. The tragic events in Lemoore Township serve as a reminder that even the most meticulously planned crimes will ultimately be solved. Cruel and inhumane acts will not go unpunished, and those responsible will face the law. 31-year-old Carly McBride disappeared under mysterious circumstances after visiting her ex-boyfriend's house. After receiving a missing person report, the police began an investigation. However, it took the authorities almost 2 years to answer the question, where did Carly disappear to? Carly was born on April 14, 1983 in the family of Steve McBride and Lorraine Williams. She was a cheerful and outgoing child with a close relationship with her parents. Growing up, Carly started experiencing more and more problems. She started abusing alcohol and illegal substances. Nevertheless, she made efforts to overcome these harmful addictions. In 2014, Carly was a 31-year-old woman that lived in Belmont, New South Wales, Australia. She was a mother of 2 children, 7-year-old son, William, and 3-year-old daughter, Cadence. Carly's children were from different men, but I couldn't find any specific information about her relationship with her former partners. However, we know that Andrew Easton, Cadence's father, was one of the last people to see Carly. In 2013, Carly checked into a rehabilitation center to overcome her addiction to illegal substances. While there, she met Sale Kenneth Newson, the friendship with whom gradually grew into something more. From August 2014, Carly and Sale started spending almost all their time together. The couple had fights sometimes, but they seemed to be happy on the surface. On September 30th, 2014, Sale took Carly to Musselbrook, where her 3-year-old daughter Cadence lived with her father, Andrew Easton. Carly came to stay with her for a few hours. She entered the house of her former partner at about 12:30 p.m. Sale didn't stay with her, but they agreed he would return in a few hours. However, when Sale came to pick up Carly, she was no longer there. Carly's ex-partner, Andrew Easton, said they fought, so Carly left. She planned to go to the nearest McDonald's located about a 20-minute walk from Andrew Easton's house. Puzzled that Carly didn't call to tell him where she would be waiting for him, Sale started calling her himself. Since all attempts were unsuccessful, Sale drove towards McDonald's where she allegedly planned to go. Along the way, he looked around hoping to find Carly sitting somewhere waiting for him. He suggested her phone was dead, but Carly was nowhere to be seen. She wasn't at McDonald's where she supposedly went or anywhere near it. Sale drove around the streets of Musselbrook for a while, but it was in vain. Carly seemed to disappear into thin air. When she didn't return home to Belmont that evening, Sale contacted the police. The detectives asked him the details of what had happened. It would be exactly the same thing every time. I would drop her off. She would get out and go to the front door. She would have her daughter in her arms and turn around and wave me off, Newson said. She would ring me twice and text me twice every visit to let me know she was okay. But on that day, I dropped her off about 12:30 p.m. and things were just different. And I didn't hear from her again. Not a thing. I texted her. I called her, but the phone just rang out. Newson said he turned up at the house about 4:30 p.m. as usual to pick up Carly, only to be told by her ex that she had left after an argument earlier that afternoon and headed on foot towards a McDonald's restaurant about 1 mile away. Undoubtedly, the following question arose. Did Carly leave her ex-partner's house? Or Andrew Easton was hiding something? His story suggested he was the last person to see her. However, no other witnesses could confirm that Carly really left his house. Police interviewed neighbors and people living along the route Carly would have taken if she had gone to McDonald's. The fact that no one saw her has further increased suspicions about her former partner. Unfortunately, no surveillance cameras near Andrew Easton's house could confirm or deny his words about Carly leaving around 2 p.m. After reviewing the recordings from the surveillance cameras at McDonald's, the investigators found no evidence she was ever there. Police searched fields behind a nearby residential area for clues. However, a chief investigator of this case said nothing particularly remarkable had been found, adding that the investigation would continue. They urged anyone with information about the disappearance of Carly McBride to contact the police department. She was last seen wearing blue jeans, sandals, and a yellow t-shirt, and she was carrying a tan handbag. After obtaining a search warrant, the police examined the house where Carly was seen last. A group of police officers went there hoping to find clues that could shed some light on what happened to the mother of 2 children. But after searching Andrew Easton's house, the police did not find new clues. Nothing there indicated that someone committed a crime in that house. However, investigators did find something suspicious. They discovered Carly's Facebook account got deleted a few hours after she vanished before the official report of her disappearance. This mysterious deletion of her account on a social network raised a lot of questions. Deletion of her account on a social network raised a lot of questions. Are the account deletion in Carly's disappearance somehow connected? Was she the one to delete her account? Or did someone else do it? Why was the account deleted? Perhaps the Facebook messages could tell about what happened, and that's why someone deleted the account. To get answers to these questions, the detectives turned to the U.S. Department of Justice, hoping the latter would help restore Carly's account and determine who could have deleted it. Facebook data analysis is done at the company's headquarters in Menlo Park, California, but Sergeant Wright said Miss McBride's Facebook friends could help New South Wales police. We're asking if anyone may have been in contact with Carly via Facebook or any other social media in the days leading up to her disappearance. If anyone noticed anything unusual, if they could come forward and let us know, he said. Given the timing of the Facebook page being shut down and in the context of the disappearance, we think it's hugely suspicious, but it's also something that could hold some vital information about what happened to Carly. Carly's parents didn't believe their daughter had just fled to start a new life. Close friend and flatmate Carly Smith said nothing appeared out of the ordinary as she spoke with Carly on the phone as she traveled to Muswell Brook. She was so down to earth. I would call her a free spirit. She was easygoing. She just loved life, Miss Smith said. She was always there for her friends. If you were having a bad day, she just knew, and she would be in contact. And she also made a plea. We all wake every day not knowing what happened, not knowing where she is, she said. You have to have a conscience. Come forward with some news. Just give us something. The police thoroughly searched the area where Carly was before her disappearance. The search included dogs, police divers examining the Hunter River and its surroundings, and aerial and trail bike patrols. And yet none of this helped to find any traces of Carly McBride. Months passed, but the investigation did not bring any results. Carly didn't leave any digital footprints. After she disappeared, she never turned on her phone. Her social media accounts were inactive, and she did not use bank cards. Investigators began to assume that Carly was no longer alive. 9 months after Carly's disappearance, her parents sought help finding their daughter. They were joined by Detective Timothy Seymour, who could contribute by requesting any information helpful to the case. Miss McBride's mother, Lorraine Williams, shed tears during the public appeal and begged for help to find her beloved daughter. "If you know anything, even if it's the smallest thing, please come forward and help us," she said. Steve and Lorraine said their family experienced difficulties after Carly's disappearance. "We are coping the best we can," Mr. McBride said. "As far as Carly's children are concerned, it's a fairly complex area. Both children have two different fathers, and to be honest, we haven't had too much close contact with those children. So we're just hoping that changes so we can have further contact with them." Detective Inspector Timothy Seymour said officers had worked tirelessly since Miss McBride's disappearance. "We have a plethora of information that we are sorting through. However, we are still appealing again," Inspector Seymour said. "The breakthrough moment may come from somebody who might think they have an innocuous piece of information." Over time, Carly's parents started realizing that they would probably never see their daughter alive again. Lorraine wrote a heartbreaking letter addressing the man who robbed her of her daughter. "I don't believe there is one person who does not now know what happened to my bub or hasn't noticed what has happened on that fateful day. Please help us for her children. They are innocent and gorgeous babies. Whoever you are, you have taken their mummy away. They are lifeline to fun times and happiness in their lives. Their tower of strength. They will never feel her soft, warm, and reassuring kisses and her big warm hugs with that big contagious belly laugh of hers and her radiant smile. Their memories are lost. They cannot say goodbye to her. Our pain, anguish, angst, and frustration are keeping us all down, causing us to wake up super vigilant that we might get a call to say they have found my bub. Whoever you are, you decided on that day to rip my daughter away from us, you bottom-feeding runt. We are left with question after question after question. We don't know how to grieve or what we are grieving. We are in a kind of grief limbo. Our little beautiful poor babies need to know where their mommy is. They are the innocent victims in this horrible nightmare we are enduring. Please someone come forward so they can move on and grow into the amazing people their mommy would have wanted them to be. We can't honor and respect Carly's life until she is found. My daughter is reeling you in, and you will be a fine catch when you least expect it. This is my only wish, that we find my bub, that we can put her to rest. It is a basic human right with the dignity and respect that she deserves. Then her babies and their beautiful but broken hearts and heads can start to heal, and they may have a life without the anguish and pain and angst. You didn't give my daughter a chance. Please give her children the knowledge they ache for. William and Cadence should not be burdened with this pain. Please help us give them some semblance of grief and loss in their journey. Carly is a proud Aboriginal woman, as is her beautiful sister, and I am proud and honored to be their mother. No one deserves this in life, but my baby is reeling you in. You are breaking while we are aching. Your truth is Carly's truth, and in turn is our truth. Please someone speak up. Since the police couldn't link Carly's disappearance to her ex-partner, Andrew Easton, they turned their attention to another potential suspect, Sale Newson. During the investigation, they learned that the relationship between Carly and Sale was far from perfect. The man was very jealous, which was a frequent cause of their fights. Despite their relatively short relationship, Newsom told everyone he was deeply in love with Carly, mentioning she was the first woman he had fallen in love with in the last 14 years. He desperately asked for any information, participated in launching a Facebook page, offered financial rewards, and knocked on every door in the area where she was last seen. But notwithstanding these public statements of love and devotion, Newsom almost immediately started intimate relationships with other women. Besides, a few hours after reporting Carly missing, he offered sexual intercourse to several women. Carly disappeared on September 30th, and on October 2nd, Sale spent the night with another woman. But in public, he behaved like an inconsolable guy who had lost the love of his life. Detectives also discovered that Sale and Carly had an argument 2 days before her disappearance. The reason for this fight was Facebook messages that Carly allegedly received from other men. However, all this was only circumstantial evidence. They needed direct links to bring any charges against Sale Newson. In April 2015, the authorities searched properties at 3 addresses, one in Muswellbrook and the other 2 in Scone. Scone is a town in the Upper Hunter Shire in the Hunter region of New South Wales, Australia. The distance from Scone to Muswell Brook is about 15 miles. During the searches, they seized 3 firearms and an unspecified amount of illegal substances and arrested a 24-year-old man, James Cunene. However, the police stressed that the charges weren't related to the ongoing investigation into Carly's disappearance, and yet they did arise during this investigation. Thus, we should keep this name in mind. Almost 2 years have passed since Carly was last seen alive. The police continued to investigate, but there were no new clues to help solve the case. But then, suddenly, there was a breakthrough. On August 7, 2016, in a rural area near Scone, 2 local pedestrians found the remains in a shallow grave in a bush just a few feet from the road. Forensic examination confirmed that these were the remains of Carly McBride, a mother of 2 from Belmont, who went missing on September 30, 2014 in Muswellbrook. The police postponed the announcement of finding her body for 4 days, hoping to obtain additional evidence. Superintendent Guiana repeated police suspicions that they did not suspect Carly, 31, had been snatched off a street by a stranger. We don't believe that this was a random act, so we are looking into her past and as many people as we can find, he said outside Scone Police Station. But he stopped short of identifying any suspects in the case as it is all too fresh. It has taken us 2 years to get this breakthrough, and we have a fairly vast volume of fresh evidence that we need to evaluate in a thorough fashion, he said. We have put a lot of work into this in the past 2 years. The team here is pretty keen to solve this for Carly's family, and we have got so much new evidence now that it is going to take a lot of work. But we are well into it, he said. The heartbroken parents have told through tears of their desperate need for answers. Please come forward with anything, Lorraine sobbed. We still need to know who did this to my baby. The couple said they have had some closure now with her body being found and were extremely grateful for the police and public help to find their lost daughter. For 10 months, the investigators carried out extensive work, which resulted in the issued arrest warrant for Sale Newson. On June 19, 2017, he was arrested and taken to a police station. Newson denied any involvement in the death of Carly McBride. However, Sale Newson wasn't the only one who received charges. Police believed that 26-year-old James Cunene was the one who helped Newson dispose of the body. Carly McBride, Sale Newson, and James Cunene met in a rehabilitation center for people with addiction to alcohol and illegal substances. Each one left the center at different times and for various reasons, but they stayed in touch. The trial of Sale Newson began in August 2018 and protracted for several years because the police had only circumstantial evidence. Prosecutors alleged that Newson met with Carly after she left her ex-partner's house, struck her several blows to the head and back in a jealous rage, and threw her body away. Forensic experts have determined that Carly McBride died from multiple blunt force trauma. She suffered 23 fractures to her skull, 13 fractures to the torso, and spinal and rib fractures. The judge said Carly McBride suffered blunt force at the hands of Newson before she died. Judge Irise also noted how Newson had told interviewing police he was a skilled mixed martial arts fighter. His main sport was Thai boxing. I had 20 fights and 20 wins. I trained alongside world champions, but when I got really good, I got too old, he told police. I find the cause death was severe trauma to the brain due to a high degree of force to the deceased's head. The judge said, I am satisfied the offender caused death by the use of fists or feet or both or the use of objects. While searching Newson's house, police found the map in a shoebox under the bed. This map contained a drawn circle around the towns of Muswellbrook and Scone. Carly's remains were found exactly in this radius. That map also had the numbers 1, 2, and 3 written on it in locations outside Muswellbrook, with Senior Constable Mohini giving evidence that the first 2 numbers marked the location of point-to-point cameras. After the police found Carly's remains in 2016, Newson called her father, Steve. During the conversation, Newson mentioned that the found skeleton was missing hand bones, and yet the police never disclosed this information. The only people who knew about it were the police, Carly's parents, and the Department of Forensic Medicine at the John Hunter Hospital. As the authorities believed, Newsom knew about it because he was familiar with the crime scene, and he was the person who left Carly's body where they found it 2 years later. Moreover, the clothes on Carly's remains matched the ones she wore on the day of her disappearance. It suggested she died shortly after leaving her former partner's house. The police couldn't find her purse and phone. When police searched Newson's mobile phone, they discovered he had deleted Google location services between September 18th and October 2nd, 2014. During the trial, the investigators learned that the photo of Carly, which Newson took on the way to Musselbrook and later used in missing person flyers, was edited and cropped even before the police received the report of Carly missing. When the search for Carly began, Newson offered a $20,000 reward for information about her whereabouts. However, his bank account showed he was broke, which meant he offered the reward only because he knew no one would ever find her. Thus, he wouldn't have to pay. Newsom injected himself into the police investigation from the start, trying to deflect suspicion onto others and attempting to get information about where police and other emergency services would be searching. He also conducted a canvass of the neighboring streets searching for CCTV or witnesses, which police said was done not to find information but to suppress it and to determine if anyone had seen him intercepting Miss McBride. And while volunteers and police searched for her around Muswell Brook and handed out missing person flyers, Newson was in Sydney, messaging friends about how he was driving an Audi R8. As well as that, Newson claimed to know the area where Ms. McBride was found, like the back of my hand, and described it to Carly McBride's father, Steve McBride, despite only seeing footage of a fake crime scene set up by police. The images you are seeing now are not a real crime scene, but a staged one that the police used to see Newson's reaction. The more investigators dug into Newson, interviewed him, looked at his Facebook messages, listened to his phone calls, the more he shone the light on himself. After examining his internet search history, investigators discovered that he was looking for information on how to delete a Facebook account. His account remained active, but Carly's account got deleted shortly after. Although all the evidence was circumstantial, the prosecutor said they did have puzzle pieces that began to reveal a picture when put together. Eventually, these pieces turned into an irrefutable case, ruling out any other possible explanations for how Carly McBride disappeared and how her body was about 82 feet from the side of the road. The judge concluded that the motive for the brutal and unplanned attack on Carly was Newson's jealousy. After he picked Carly up from Musselbrook, he discovered she had spent about 90 minutes with her ex-partner instead of spending time with her daughter as was planned. Carly's daughter was not at home during that time, and the fact that she was alone with her ex-partner for an hour and a half allegedly ended with Newsom attacking Carly in a jealous rage. Miss McBride's mother, Lorraine Williams, told a sentencing hearing that she lived in a blur of grief and anxiety for 2 years as she waited for her happy, gorgeous, and outgoing daughter to come home to her 2 young children. Instead, the next time she saw Carly was in the morgue, a day she tearfully described as the worst day of my life. Carly should be here living her life with her children, her sister, her father, and me. Miss Williams said, "After today, I never want to hear, speak, or see the man who took my beautiful daughter's life ever again. He no longer has any power to hurt me, and I refuse to think of him anymore. I will miss Carly for the rest of my life every second of every day," Miss Williams said. Almost 7 years after he reported Carly missing, 43-year-old Newsom was found guilty. In December 2021, he was sentenced to 27 years in prison with parole eligibility in 2038. After the sentencing, Newsom turned to the judge to restate his innocence. "I understand the verdict's been the verdict," he said. "Your Honor, I'm innocent. From the day I reported Carly missing to this very day, I've been compliant with the police, with the courts, with the jails, everything, and I've been found guilty of a crime that I did not commit. Someone out there has committed this crime, and it wasn't me. It wasn't me. And now I've got a big struggle ahead of me to try and clear my name through the courts after this." James Cunin, who helped Newsom dispose of Carly McBride's body, denied his guilt. However, in July 2022, a jury found him guilty too. The judge said Cunin lied to police in 3 interrogations to create a false alibi for Newsom and deleted data from the phone to cover his tracks. Unfortunately, I couldn't find his picture, but it is known that when Cunin received charges in the Carly McBride case, he was already in prison for illegal weapons possession and prohibited substances. In November 2022, the 31-year-old Cunin showed almost no reaction matter the verdict. Nothing would ever return their daughter. On February 5, 2010, at York Crown Court, Harold Landry's trial began under heavy scrutiny. Harold was accused of taking the life of his wife, Lucy Davis. The final hearing, marking a climactic end to this grim saga, took place in early February 2011 at Wolverhampton Court. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Judge David Fett, known for his uncompromising nature, presided over the proceedings. Harold Landry, a 64-year-old man, the center of this legal battle. The prosecutor, Rachel Brand, presented the evidence against Harold, painting a chilling picture of the events leading up to Lucy's tragic death. Brand's cold and precise now stood condemned as her murderer. Pete, Harold's friend and lawyer, unable to bear the burden of defending him, passed the case to Andy Childs, an experienced attorney. Childs faced a daunting task to convince the court that Harold had not intended to kill Lucy, but was driven to uncontrollable aggression. Throughout the trial, Harold was a figure of misery and regret. He wept openly, professing his love for Lucy and expressing deep remorse. He pleaded guilty to manslaughter, hoping to mitigate his sentence. The defense argued that Harold's actions were a result of an irresistible outburst of aggression, provoked by circumstances beyond his control. However, this argument faced fierce opposition. The prosecution presented the court with shocking photographs of Lucy's injuries. The sheer brutality depicted in these images spoke volumes, overshadowing Harold's claims of unintentional harm. Each piece of evidence painted a grimmer picture of Harold's actions on that fateful day. When the final verdict was announced, Harold Landry was sentenced to life in prison. The decision brought a sense of closure to the legal process, but left an indelible mark on all those involved. This tragic case stands as a somber reminder of the fine line between love and violence. It underscores the unpredictable nature of human relationships and the devastating consequences when that line is crossed. Lucy Davis's death serves as a poignant example of how quickly love can turn into a nightmare, leaving a trail of heartache and loss in its wake. Domestic violence can lead to fatal consequences, as it did in 1971 among the picturesque Welsh landscapes. Born in the small town of Pontypridd, Lucy Davis was a charming girl whose childhood was filled with unconditional love and warmth. Roger and Andrea, Lucy's parents, created an atmosphere of happiness and comfort in their home. Together with her younger sister Anna, Lucy grew up in the beautiful village of Glencoe. Lucy took her first steps among majestic mountains and enchanting forests. Her charming smile and kind heart set her apart from other children. She easily won the sympathy of her teachers and peers. Seeing his daughter's passion, her father gave her and her sister the opportunity to immerse themselves in the magical world of horseback riding. Under the strict guidance of experienced instructors, they learned the basics of this noble art, conquering peaks and overcoming obstacles. Lucy and Anna became professional horse riders. Spending her childhood in Wales was a real paradise for Lucy Davis. She blossomed like a beautiful flower there, absorbing the beauty of nature and the love of her family and loved ones. The hobby of horse riding not only gave Lucy and Anna loyal companions, but also served as a real school of life. Horses taught them discipline, self-control, and responsibility. The sisters' talent and perseverance were recognized at prestigious competitions, where they won multiple awards. However, Lucy's world wasn't limited to the riding arena. Her excellent mind and hunger for knowledge motivated her to make new discoveries. Music became another passion of young Lucy. She enthusiastically took flute and piano lessons, honing her skills. Her efforts were not in vain. A year later, she played both instruments perfectly, charming audiences with her talent. Lucy was delighted to join the Glamorgan Youth Orchestra, where her musical journey continued to flourish. Lucy Davis dedicated herself to refining her musical talents, finding an outlet for her love of music and creativity within the school choir. Music wasn't just a pastime for her. It was a profound means of expression. Growing up, Lucy's days were a blend of carefree play and diligent work, instilling in her a strong foundation of dedication and hunger for knowledge, qualities that would shape her future achievements and endear her to those around her. In high school, Lucy crossed paths with Garrett Jenkinson, a fellow Welshman shrouded in mystery. Despite the enigma surrounding Garrett's past, The two formed a close friendship that only deepened over time. Though Garrett harbored romantic feelings for Lucy, he chose to keep them buried deep within himself. Upon graduating in 1998, Lucy was resolute in her pursuit of a musical career and higher education. She secured admission to the University of Yorkshire in Northern England, initially envisioning herself as a future music educator. However, as her ambitions evolved, Lucy found herself drawn to the bustling artistic landscape of a metropolitan city. This newfound aspiration led her to Grimy McAllister, whose worldview and sense of humor resonated deeply with Lucy. Their relationship flourished, prompting Lucy to introduce Grimy to her parents. The initial encounter proved successful, solidifying the bond between Lucy and Grimy and setting the stage for their future together. Roger and Andre recognized him as the ideal life partner for their daughter almost instantly. After careful consideration, Lucy and Grimy made the decision to move in together, forging their own family. Sometime after the move, Lucy proposed the idea of official cohabitation, which Grimy agreed to in 1995. Even while still pursuing their studies in college, they welcomed a son into their lives, whom they named James. Lucy opted to take a break from her own pursuits to focus on caring for her son, while Grimy diligently continued his studies to provide for their family, taking up night shifts at the city's postal sorting department. Lucy into a whirlwind of challenges, but she faced them with optimism and determination. Despite her deep love for her family, the months spent at home with her child were tinged with loneliness. Rarely did she and her husband find time to be together, and his night shifts only exacerbated the situation. Seeking solace and connection, Lucy created a social media account under the pseudonym Missaria, immersing herself in a virtual community where she could share her experiences and forge new friendships. It was within this online realm that her attention was captured by a user named Harold Landry, a 53-year-old entrepreneur hailing from Louisiana. Rising from humble beginnings, Harold's fervent pursuit of independence and success from a young age propelled him to establish a thriving company manufacturing hydraulic equipment for major oil companies in the southern United States. His hard work not only brought him material wealth, but also garnered him prestige and eventually billionaire status. Conversing with Harold proved to be a revelation for Lucy. His life experiences, unwavering dedication, and boundless generosity left her captivated. However, their relationship faced its share of challenges. The disparity in their ages, social standings, and lifestyles created friction between them. Harold's life seemed extravagant and diverse, filled with eccentric hobbies and lavish acquisitions, including real estate holdings on KML. In Mexico, Harold's marital status was shrouded in mystery. He had been married twice and divorced twice, yet nothing was known about any children from these unions. However, in 1992, Harold's life took a dramatic turn when he divorced his second wife and crossed paths with Geraldine Price. Geraldine, born in 1966 and originally from Mexico, was 20 years his junior and married to Chris Price with 2 children. Despite her familial ties, Harold managed to capture the heart of this young woman. On February 6, 1994, Harold orchestrated a romantic dinner for Geraldine in New Orleans. They hired a babysitter, Christian Houghton, to tend to their children, allowing them to enjoy an evening devoid of parental responsibilities. As the night drew to a close, Harold escorted his girlfriend home. In a gesture of gratitude, he offered Christian a ride home, to which she accepted. Unbeknownst to Harold, fate had a surprise in store. Chris Price, Geraldine's husband, had been surveilling the couple. Upon witnessing their clandestine affair, Chris resolved not to let the matter slide. He pursued Harold, and when they halted at a red light, Chris unleashed a torrent of accusations. Despite Harold's composed demeanor, the situation escalated. In a fit of rage, Chris dared Harold to shoot him. Without hesitation, Harold brandished his firearm, warning Chris of the consequences. Ignoring the warning, Chris goaded Harold further. In a swift and decisive action, Harold fired, striking Chris in the neck. Miraculously, prompt medical intervention spared Chris's life. In 1997, Harold stood trial in St. Mary Parish Courts, charged with the attempted murder of Chris Price. His attorney, Pete Fannin, argued that Harold had been entrapped. Although the jury found Harold guilty of aggravated assault with a weapon, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. However, following an appeal, Harold was released on parole, having paid a fine and completed community service. Harold found himself forever indebted to Pete for his legal representation and unwavering advocacy, which ultimately secured his freedom. As their friendship blossomed, Harold and Chris reached a settlement agreement, though the exact compensation remained undisclosed. Settling in Covington as a wealthy man, Harold openly shared his past with Lucy, including failed marriages and a troubling incident. Rather than repelling Lucy, Harold's revelations only seemed to deepen her attraction towards him. His gift of persuasion captivated her, and after parting ways with Grimy, Lucy and Harold decided to embark on a romantic relationship. Eager to shield their love from unnecessary complications, Harold endeavored to avoid any potential troubles. In the early 2000s, he journeyed to England to meet Lucy's parents, Roger and Andre, who, despite initial surprise at the age difference, supported their daughter's choice wholeheartedly, refraining from interference in their relationship. Expressing his devotion through lavish gifts, including expensive jewelry, Harold spared no expense in fulfilling Lucy's desires. His love for her grew so intense that thoughts of marriage lingered constantly in his mind, yet he insisted on perfection before taking the plunge. Seeking to fortify their bond, Harold extended an invitation to Lucy, her son Jameson, and her ex-husband Grimmy for an unforgettable trip to Mexico. To Harold, Mexico wasn't merely a vacation spot. It represented paradise amplified by the proximity of Pete's apartment, lending an air of comfort to their excursion. Inspired by the purchase of a diamond engagement ring, Harold excitedly shared the news with Pete, who harbored suspicions about Lucy's fidelity due to her frequent rendezvous with Grimmy. Blinded by love, Harold proposed to Lucy, and she accepted his proposal, leading to their marriage in the midst of February 2003. Acquiring a $1 million home in Warshire County, their new family life in the neighborhood overflowed with joy. Welcoming Jameson into the family with open arms, Harold treated him as his own, fostering a strong familial bond. Soon after their wedding, their daughter, Hearth, was born, becoming the apple of their eyes. Surrounded by supportive neighbors like Rachel Clark and Stephen Kennedy, Lucy and Harold's familial ties deepened with each passing day. However, as time went on, issues began to arise in their relationship. Harold grew increasingly demanding, expecting Lucy's unwavering obedience. Lucy, who had always been an independent woman, was not prepared to acquiesce to Harold's every demand. Arguments and disagreements became more frequent, casting a shadow over their family life. Their son, Jameson, bore witness to this tense atmosphere, and it negatively impacted his childhood. Even their neighbors began to take note of Lucy and Harold's escalating reliance on alcohol, exacerbating their familial problems. However, when the arguments and shouting ceased, neighbors interpreted it as a sign that the family was attempting to reconcile. In February 2009, Lucy found solace in virtual conversations with her old school friend, Garrett, via social media. Sensing his wife's emotional distance, Harold made the difficult decision to leave for Mexico, allowing Lucy space. In his absence, Lucy invited Garrett to visit, blindsiding Harold upon his return. Lucy swiftly filed for divorce, prompting Harold to begin an affair with their neighbor, Rachel Walbin. The divorce proceedings were marred by disputes over property division. Lucy, adamant about keeping the house for the sake of their children, opposed Harold's insistence on selling it. Their disagreements intensified as Lucy revealed unsettling truths about Harold's past, further fueling the acrimony. Amidst the emotional turmoil, Lucy accepted Garrett's invitation to spend time with him in Wales, making no effort to conceal her phone conversations from Harold upon her return. Despite her efforts to salvage their relationship, the constant arguments persisted, and the tension between them became unbearable for Jameson and their daughter, Hart. On the evening of February 1, 2010, as the day drew to a close, Harold, intoxicated from several glasses of wine, was taken aback by the delivery of a package addressed to their neighbor, Stephen Kennedy. It was closer to 9 p.m. when Harold returned from work. Stephen noticed a notification that his parcel had been delivered to Harold. Seeing Harold at home, he approached him to retrieve his package. Harold greeted him warmly and offered him a drink. Stephen, not refusing a glass of wine, agreed, and Harold poured him one. As Stephen entered and greeted Lucy, he observed Harold was already inebriated. After a single glass of wine, Stephen took his parcel and left. Shortly after, a heated argument erupted between the couple regarding furniture for their new house. Jameson, hearing the commotion, rushed into the kitchen to witness Harold striking his mother with a kitchen utensil. Reacting promptly, he dialed the police and comforted his sister Lucy, who was then fleeing the house with the children. Lucy sought refuge at Stephen's house, hoping for assistance. However, en route, Harold caught up with her and viciously attacked her with a knife, stabbing her in the chest. Callously, he dragged her body under a bush and disappeared. Hearing Lucy's screams, Stephen rushed outside and discovered her body. Initially thinking she had fainted, he quickly realized the severity of the situation. Officer Steve Seafox, arriving at the scene, promptly called for an ambulance and commenced a search for Harold. Despite efforts, Harold evaded capture, leaving behind terrified children who sought shelter until the police arrived. This tragic incident marked the onset of their family's downfall and the start of a grueling journey towards justice. An ambulance promptly arrived and transported Lucy to Yorkshire Hospital, but it was too late. Lucy succumbed to her injuries upon arrival. Meanwhile, consumed by fear and remorse, Harold sought solace at the doorstep of his friend Rachel. With trembling voice, he confessed to committing a heinous act, but withheld the details. In an attempt to atone, he transferred a substantial sum of $40,000 to Rachel, relinquished all his assets, including cash, car keys, and paychecks. After Harold headed home, the police began their search for him. They scoured the streets, interviewed witnesses, but Harold seemed to vanish into thin air. Finally, fortune smiled upon the detectives when Harold was arrested on his way from Rachel's house. His face, distorted by fear and remorse, spoke volumes. Lucy's family, Roger and Andrea, were overwhelmed with grief. In an official press release, they expressed immense sorrow for the loss of their daughter and declined to comment further. The forensic medical examination confirmed Lucy died from multiple stab wounds to the chest. Evidence found at the crime scene and the testimony of Jameson, Lucy's son, who witnessed the tragedy, became pivotal in solving the case. The tale of Harold and Lucy is a love story turned nightmare. Although the trial concluded, the echo of the tragedy will resonate for years to come. Harold Landry, found guilty of Lucy's death, was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 16 years before parole eligibility. He would be 82 years old upon release, but no sentence could bring Lucy back. Roger and Andrea found solace in the fair verdict, though their hearts remained heavy with grief. Harold Landry maintained his innocence, vowing to appeal the verdict, claiming he wouldn't change anything, even knowing the future. The Landry family remained resilient, promising to preserve Lucy's memory by embodying her best qualities for their grandchildren. Despite the irreparable loss, Lucy would forever remain a symbol of light and love in their hearts. Looking ahead, the Landry family embraced hope. Harold received the punishment he deserved, while Lucy's legacy continued to her loved ones. With Lucy's love and light in their hearts, the Landry family found the strength to move forward, carrying her memory with them into the future. Heather, just 22 years old, had recently embarked on her college journey, settling into her job, and it felt like life was full of promise. Maple's smile and laughter were contagious, and her constant chatter filled the air. She radiated warmth and energy, uplifting everyone around her. Everything changed on January 7, 2015, when Heather Maples didn't show up for work. Her lifeless body was discovered in her apartment, partly unclothed. Who had the right to take Heather Maples' life? Detectives faced a challenging investigation because Heather had no enemies, and the motive behind this crime remained unclear. If not for one small detail, Heather Maples' death could have remained unsolved, and the criminal would have gone unpunished. On a typical morning at the real estate agency in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, on August 7, 2015, Kelsey Price arrived at work and began her usual tasks. Heather, her friend and colleague, was running late, which wasn't surprising to Kelsey as Heather was known for her lack of punctuality. Kelsey started calling Heather to wake her up, but received no answer. The previous night, Heather had planned to go to a bar with some friends and had asked Kelsey to come get her if she overslept or didn't answer her calls. Therefore, Kelsey wasn't concerned and went to Heather's apartment to wake her up. The girls' apartments were located in the same complex where they worked. Upon arriving, Kelsey found the front door unlocked. Easily entering inside, she saw her friend lying on the bed, sleeping on her stomach, wearing only a crop top and no underwear. Assuming Heather had a wild night, Kelsey tried to wake her up, but there was no response. She then tapped Heather's foot, attempting to rouse her from her sleep, which no one would ever interrupt again. Maple's foot was so cold that Kelsey literally jumped back in horror at the realization of what had happened. Kelsey Price, in horror, stepped out of the apartment and called 911. Soon, emergency services were on the scene. Detective Tommy Massey was one of the first to arrive at the crime scene, and the forensic team meticulously combed through the apartment. Heather was indeed partially undressed with signs of blows on her face. The hair of the poor girl was soaked in blood, which was also splattered on the walls. It was clear she had been brutally beaten, tortured, and actually assaulted. Massey and his colleague, Detective Maples, coincidentally sharing Heather's surname, recalled this crime as a horrifying nightmare. That's understandable as witnessing such a heart-wrenching scene is extremely difficult. Heather Nicole Maples was born on August 23, 1992 in Ocala, Florida. Her mother jokingly called Heather a hurricane baby. This nickname was entirely justified as many envied the energy and courage that Heather possessed. In February 2004, Jennifer Hunter gave birth to her second child. Heather welcomed a brother, Ryan, into her life with great joy. However, Ryan was later diagnosed with significant developmental delays, and the older sister of her own accord dedicated all her free time to him. She took care of him, happily spent time with him, towered him to speak, walk, and eat on his own. Heather was in the 7th grade at the time and devoted all the following years until graduation to Ryan. Showing immense love and dedication, the journey began with a call from her former classmate, Chaz, inviting her to join him in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where he studied. According to him, it was the perfect place for Heather, with a small college town where she could get a great opportunity to prepare for college. Heather accepted, and in January 2015, the future student went to Chaz in Murfreesboro. By the way, their relationship soon turned romantic. A completely different life began for the girl. With the support of her best friend, Kelsey, Heather found a job in the office of the residential complex where they lived. Maples was balancing work with her college preparations. Her friends and family supported her. Everything seemed to be going well. But soon, her relationship with Chaz began to crumble, which led to a breakup, and Chaz moved away. At the August, she excitedly called her mother to share this wonderful news. She had been accepted to college. Her mother, filled with pride, was thrilled for Heather's achievement. However, a week later, Heather failed to show up for work, sparking concern and uncertainty. The detectives understood that considering the nature of the crime, it could have been related to Heather's personal life. At that point, most of her friends were considered suspects, and frankly speaking, there were reasons for that. Upon examining the apartment, there were no signs of forced entry, suggesting that Heather likely knew her attacker and possibly let them in herself. After a thorough investigation of the crime scene, several important pieces of evidence were discovered. Unknown DNA and a hair that did not belong to the victim. All of this was sent for analysis to identify the suspect. However, the most significant piece of evidence was a clear bloody fingerprint on the right side of Heather's bed. Detective Massey explained that if someone had deliberately dipped their finger in ink and intentionally left their mark, it wouldn't have been so clear and precise. Of course, this print was sent for analysis as well. Additionally, Heather's mobile phone was found in the apartment, but without the password, accessing its contents was impossible. This is where Kelsey came in handy. She played a crucial role, not only helping with the phone, but also deciding to inform Heather's mother of her death, believing it would be better coming from someone who loved and cared for Heather. Detective Massey hoped to get a lot of information about Heather from her friend, Kelsey Price. He wanted to know everything about the victim's personal life, especially her relationship with Chaz. Kelsey told the detective that the relationship was quite tense as Chaz had obvious anger management issues. And sometimes, he was too aggressive and cruel towards Heather, so the girl decided to end the relationship herself. Therefore, the police immediately decided to investigate Chaz. But an unexpected turn of events occurred. A young man named Michael was determined to access the crime scene despite the caution tape. He had keys to Heather's apartment. According to Michael, on the evening before her death, Heather called him and invited him for dinner, which he accepted. Immediately after dinner, Michael went home, unlike Heather, who went to a local bar with friends. But later, Heather reached out to Michael for help. As Michael recounted, Heather was in trouble. A young man named Ortavio was bothering her and was quite aggressive. Immediately after the incident, Michael offered to drive Heather home. As per his statement, it was around 2:30 in the morning on August 7th, the last time he saw Heather. Additionally, during the interrogation, Michael mentioned that Heather's front door should have been unlocked because he had her keys since she was dressed in a dress and didn't have pockets to carry them, and he simply forgot to return them after unlocking the door. Michael was very disappointed and did not seem like a liar at all, but investigators had to take his fingerprints and a DNA sample. They also contacted the bar to obtain surveillance footage, which confirmed everything Michael had said during the interrogation. Analysis confirmed that the fingerprints and DNA found at the crime scene did not match his. After Michael was cleared as a suspect, investigators turned their attention to the man who had been with Heather that night, Ortavio. With Kelsey's help in unlocking Heather's mobile phone, interest in Ortavio significantly increased. Detectives discovered that Heather had messaged Ortavio, a friend of hers, inviting him to her apartment just hours before she was found dead. But why did Heather call Ortavio to her home after Michael had saved her from him? The answer was simple. They were friends and became more persistent than usual at the bar. Heather was caught off guard. She wasn't prepared for this. Now the detectives needed to speak with Ortavio to get his side of the story. Interrogation continued. The detectives intensified their questioning of Ortavio using a tough interrogation method that not every suspect could withstand. Ortavio was shocked by what he heard. It seemed he genuinely didn't know what had happened to Heather. Following the interrogation, he willingly agreed to a DNA test, confident that it would clear his name. The results proved him right as the DNA found at the crime scene did not match his, leading to his exclusion as a suspect. Without any leads, the detectives worked practically around the clock, reviewing surveillance footage, scrutinizing every detail provided by witnesses. On the 9th day of the investigation, as Detective Massey was preparing to leave the office late at night, he received a crucial call from one of the directors of the forensic laboratory. Massey finally got the answer regarding the bloody fingerprint that was lifted from Heather's bed. It belonged to a young man named Brandon Bowling, whose fingerprints were on file due to his employment at a company where he previously worked. This development prompted Detective Massey to approach the interrogation very gently, wanting to give Brandon a chance to explain what happened that night. The detectives knew he was lying because the fingerprint was fresh. It seemed that Brandon understood he was caught, but he continued to deny any involvement in Heather's death. After questioning, detectives requested a DNA test from Brandon suggesting that if he was innocent, the test would prove it. Brandon did as he was asked, perhaps hoping to be released from police custody, but that did not happen. The investigators decided not to wait for the test results. The match of the fingerprint provided substantial grounds for the next step. The police immediately sent a request to the court for permission to access Brandon's phone, which could help the investigation confirm his movements, track calls, and texts on the night of the crime. However, they were unprepared for what they found on his phone after the court approval. The video from Brandon Bowling's phone was one of the most shocking even to the most experienced detectives. In this video, the room of the core Heather was captured. Brandon recorded everything from intimate acts to beatings. Heather was still alive at the time of the recording. In February 2018, Brandon Richmond Bowling pleaded guilty to the attack on Heather Maples. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison without the possibility of parole. On the day of the verdict, Heather's mother, Jennifer, made a speech that surprised many. When the trial ended in the corridor, Jennifer approached Bowling's mother. Jennifer simply hugged this woman, saying that they both lost their children that day. Unfortunately, Brandon Bowling never explained his motives. What are your thoughts on this? What do you think Brandon's motive was, if there was one? The case of Sheila Labar, a monster with an angelic appearance. Psychological and physical traumas received at an early age can have a very unpredictable effect on adult life. Of course, far from always, they lead to the fact that a person becomes cruel and seeks to hurt others, but sometimes it is the trauma can give rise to a real monster. Criminal psychologist Adrian Rain believes that there are genetic and psychophysical mechanisms that can turn a person into a cold-blooded killer, about which he wrote in detail in his book, Anatomy of Violence. History knows a lot of serial criminals who had a truly hellish childhood, and perhaps to them can be attributed our heroine today, Sheila Labar. This woman had an angelic appearance, which she skillfully used, seducing her victims and then brutally murdered them. Despite the fact that the court was able to prove only 2 of her crimes, criminologists are sure that there were many more. And now let's look at this difficult story from the beginning and try to understand whether Sheila Labar was a born monster or became him as a result of the cruelty that she faced in childhood. Who is Sheila Labar? Sheila Labar was born in 1958, the July 4th, in the small country town of Fort Payne, Alabama. She was the youngest of 3 children of her parents and was raised with her brother and sister Lynn. Her childhood was spent in a picturesque but rather secluded place on a farm nestled among cornfields. According to the memories of Lynn's older sibling, Sheila was an active, inquisitive, and open-minded girl with a creative streak. She liked to be in the center of attention, had a good voice and cute appearance. So perhaps, if her life had turned out differently, she would have become a famous actress or singer. But instead of bright posters, her name decorated the pages of criminal chronicles. The unimaginable cruelty of her father. The head of the family, Manuel Bailey, for many years suffered from alcohol addiction, although it would be more accurate to say that his addiction suffered from his entire family. He often went on binges, turning into a real beast who enjoyed abusing his wife and children. He insulted and humiliated them, beat them with anything that came to hand, could throw everyone out in the middle of the night in a downpour or frost, and locked himself in the house, not letting anyone inside. Mothers, daughters, and sons often had to spend the night in a barn or in the open air in the field. One day, when Manuel was once again in a drunken rage, he began throwing dishes and other objects at his family members. The mother tried to cover the children as best she could, but one of the flower pots thrown by her husband hit her youngest daughter, Sheila, in the head. Sheila suffered a serious concussion and a lifelong scar on her temple, which she painstakingly covered with her hair. But not even the insults and beatings were the worst thing that the sisters had to endure in their parents' home. According to the memories of Sheila and Lynn, Manuel from an early age forcibly inclined them to intimacy. The mother may have been aware of what was going on, but the subject was never broached. However, despite the nightmare at home, Sheila did well enough in school. She dreamed of leaving the farm as soon as possible and go to conquer the big city. The girl was quite ambitious and determined. She passionately wanted to realize her childhood dream in life and become an actress or pop singer. And she had everything for this: charisma, bright appearance, and a beautiful voice. Adulthood, first marriage. Barely Sheila was 18 years old. She left her parents' home, but adult life was not so joyful. To enter the university, she was not allowed to average score. And to move to the big city, she simply did not have the money. Then Sheila got a job as a maid in one of the hotels, where by that time her older sister was already working. It should be noted that Sheila had a slender figure and a very attractive appearance. She had big blue eyes, a charming smile, and a mop of thick long hair. She was surrounded by attention from men, and over time, she learned to use it and manipulate her suitors. In the late 70s, Labar, Then Bailey met a guy named Jonathan Baxter, and a romantic relationship began between them. Jonathan was not yet 20 years old at the time, but he already had a young daughter from a previous relationship. However, the child did not become a hindrance, and soon the couple got married. However, this marriage lasted only a few months and collapsed after Jonathan learned that the young wife abused his daughter while he disappeared at work. Sheila was frankly annoyed with the child, and she would raise her hand or lock her in a closet if she started crying or acting up. Jonathan did not organize scandals and listen to explanations. He just filed for divorce and put his wife with his belongings outside his house. He never wanted to see or hear from her again. After the divorce, Sheila dated various men and mostly lived off them. But all these relationships were fleeting and lasted from a few weeks to a couple of months until in the early 80s she met her future second husband, Ronnie Jennings. The tumultuous romance soon led to marriage, and Sheila took on a double last name, Bailey Jennings. It was an unhealthy relationship between two irascible and unstable people who regularly cheated on each other, scandalized, and even fought. Still, their marriage lasted more than 3 years. In 1984, after another family quarrel, Sheila demanded a divorce from her husband, but he refused her. In fact, Ronnie did not hold on to the relationship at all. He just wanted to piss off his wife and make her mad. And he succeeded. Sheila became hysterical, took a large number of drugs in front of her husband, drinking strong alcohol, and after this infernal cocktail, sat behind the wheel of the car and rushed down the road. Naturally, soon Sheila, under the influence of pills and alcohol, lost consciousness, flew off the road, and at high speed crashed into a tree. She miraculously survived, but suffered a massive head injury. She spent more than a week in a deep coma, and doctors made no prognosis. When Sheila finally regained consciousness and gradually recovered, she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital where she spent several months. She later complained to her sister that one of the orderlies was constantly harassing her and possibly taking advantage of her helpless state when she was heavily sedated. After all this, Sheila returned to her second husband's home, but began to behave not just aggressively, but threateningly toward him. When during another scandal, she attacked Ronnie and poked him in the chest with nail scissors. Ronnie, fearing for his own life and health, filed for divorce and hurriedly moved out of the mad woman, rich lover. When the second marriage was dissolved, the young woman began looking for lovers through the dating columns of the print media, and she left her ads there as well. But no man did not stay with her for long because Sheila tended to dominate everything, rigidly suppressing their partners both in intimate and everyday life. Soon, the photo of an attractive girl in the dating section drew the attention of 60-year-old Wilfred Bill Labar. The man had previously been married twice and had adult children and grandchildren from previous marriages. He was widowed a few years ago and had been living alone on his large country ranch ever since. Bill was a fairly wealthy man. He had a chiropractic office in Epping, New Hampshire, and on the ranch he raised horses. At the same time, he was very lonely and needed a strong, powerful woman. In fact, that's exactly what he found. Sheila was attracted by the wealth of her new acquaintance, and she decided that it would be an ideal union for her. And to make Bill completely lost his head, she began to send him a postal mail frank letters, supplementing them with her nude photos. The trap worked, and soon Labar invited a charming pen pal to visit his ranch. Their romance developed rapidly. An elderly man is not stingy on expensive gifts for a young mistress, and in the summer of 1987, she moved to live with him. This has incredibly flattered the doctor, who now went out in public with a beautiful companion who was half his age and was fit for him as a daughter. Nevertheless, he did not plan to marry Sheila. However, Sheila, not waiting for a marriage proposal, changed her name, calling herself Labar. Bill was surprised by this turn of events, but he did not object. Sheila began to interfere in all the affairs of her elderly lover, starting to control his business, finances, and disposition of his property. In addition, Bill was getting older and could not satisfy the intimate needs of a young woman. Then, according to Sheila herself, he allowed her to meet other men whom she often brought directly to their home. One of Sheila's regular lovers, closer to the mid-90s, was a Jamaican national named Wayne Ennis. He was much younger than Sheila and was initially hired as an au pair on the ranch. But soon the young man, with Bill's consent, which was probably given under pressure from Sheila, moved to live in the owner's house. In 1995, Sheila and Wayne officially legalized their relationship, and the spouse considered that from now on, he would be her only man. But soon, he realized that he was wrong because his wife continued to meet with different men. Wayne was not satisfied with this, and one day he jumped with fists on Sheila and her next lover, causing them bodily harm. Accustomed to being dominated, Sheila for the first time didn't know how to deal with her third husband, who got into a fight every time a rival appeared on the horizon. Eventually, she filed for divorce and sought a court injunction to stop Wayne from approaching her, accusing him of violence and assault. Another divorce did not affect the turbulent personal life of Sheila, who continued to meet with numerous lovers, changing them like gloves. True, now her relationship increasingly often began to end with lawsuits from men who accused Sheila not just in cruelty, but also in the threat to their lives and health. Thus, one of her boyfriends she deliberately hit by a car and almost ran over. Another almost broke his head, and another scratched his face so that he was forever scarred. Sheila, with age, became more and more dangerous to others. From every man, she demanded obedience, and in cases of disobedience, fell into a rage. In February, at the age of 74, Bill Labar died of heart failure. Although doctors and police officers did not see a criminal trail in the death of an elderly man, his family members were convinced that Sheila had something to do with it. In their opinion, she had been poisoning Bill little by little for years and literally drove him into the light. Despite the fact that Bill and Sheila were never officially married, Sheila, according to the will, became the sole heiress of all his property. The relatives tried to challenge this through the courts, but never got anywhere. They are still convinced that the mistress forced Bill to write the will she wanted, House of Temptation. After Bill's death, as I have already mentioned, all his property came under Sheila's complete control. Now she no longer had to consider anyone's opinion. She could do whatever she wanted with the estate she had inherited. She herself called her home a place of seduction and pleasure where there were no inhibitions. She met men on the streets, in bars, on the internet, lured them to her, and then tried to keep them on the ranch as long as possible. She didn't care about their age, skin color, or any physical appearance. She promised them unearthly pleasure and then sought to suppress and subjugate them to her will. Sheila regularly tried to seduce couriers by meeting them in the nude and offering an alternative method of payment. But she didn't take into account the fact that she herself was not getting any younger and was nowhere near as attractive as she used to be. It got to the point where couriers simply refused to come to her address. Neighbors noticed that on the ranch, Labar, constantly come different men, but some hurried to leave the place the same day. Others were delayed, but also for a short time. What was going on in the house itself could only be guessed at. Where had Michael Dolores disappeared to? Soon, Sheila decided to look for lovers among men who were in dire need of housing, money, or those men who suffered from addiction. This category was the most vulnerable and proved to be an easy prey for the cunning woman, who everywhere posed as a widowed millionaire and talked about her untold wealth inherited by her. In February 2004, Labar met on one of the city streets homeless man named Michael Delage. He was in a difficult life situation and lost literally everything because of addiction to illegal drugs. His relatives tried to send him to a rehabilitation clinic, but he ran away from there and has been loitering ever since. Sheila liked Michael, and she invited him to her, promising shelter, food, and the necessary drugs in exchange for intimacy. Moving to the ranch, the guy was completely dependent on his old mistress. He complied with all her demands, afraid to be on the street again. But Sheila quickly got into the taste, and her desires became more and more sophisticated. She bound, beat, and humiliated Michael, taking pleasure in it. He tried to escape several times, walking dozens of miles and hiding in homeless shelters, but he never decided to go to the police for fear they wouldn't believe him. Meanwhile, Sheila found him each time and brought him back to the ranch. In desperation, he tried to contact his family members and let them know he was in trouble. His loved ones immediately responded to this disturbing news, but it was too late. In October 2005, Michael DeLorge disappeared without a trace. When his family contacted Sheila directly, she stated that she and Michael had broken up. He had left her, and his current whereabouts were unknown to her. Michael did not show up at any of the places he had been to before. No one who knew him had seen him, and there was no way to contact him. Contacting the police was fruitless, and Labar remained beyond suspicion, trusting Kenny County. Sheila's tales of her exorbitant wealth were greatly exaggerated, and the house and automobile had to be maintained, so she was forced to get a job. Naturally, Sheila chose an occupation to her liking. She became an operator of intimate phone services. Since she had a truly enchanting voice, men fell for the bait and offered to meet her in person. Among such guys was Kenny County, who at the time of their acquaintance was barely 24 years old. The young man was attractive in appearance, very good-natured and open. However, he had a low IQ level due to which he was very gullible. This was exactly the kind of guy Labar was looking for. Kenny was very close to his mother on whom he actually depended, but Sheila, with the help of clever manipulations, managed to break this connection and literally lure Kenny to herself. She made him an unforgettable night of love and promised that they would be like this all the time. The young man decided that he had met the woman of his dreams, about which he informed his relatives and then moved to live in Sheila's house. But soon, Sheila showed the guy her true face, having arranged for him a real torture room in one of the rooms. Each time, intimacy inevitably turned into a brutal beating or something worse. Kenny's body was covered with bruises, abrasions, scratches, cuts, and burn marks, but he could not leave the house of the mistress who had completely subjugated his will. Sheila did not allow him to see and communicate with his loved ones, and his family could only guess what was happening to Kenny. The first alarm was raised by neighbors who periodically noticed the guy and were horrified by his sickly appearance. A few days before his disappearance, a local store clerk took a picture of the young man on her cell phone camera, and later this picture was attached to the case file in court. In the photo, Kenny's condition could be described as deplorable. He was very thin. There were huge bruises under his eye and on his cheek, and his nose was probably broken. Judging by the degree of healing, all these injuries had been inflicted at different times, which suggested that the guy had been brutally beaten for a long time. The contents of his cart were also alarming. He rolled 2 large canisters of fuel to the cash register, as it later turned out, for his own cremation. The store employees were so puzzled and even frightened by the guy's appearance that they decided to report him to the police for possible domestic violence. But this time, Sheila managed to get away with it, and they could not charge her with anything. Soon Kenny stopped contacting his family altogether, and when his worried mother arrived at Labar's house, the owner behaved aggressively and advised to leave Kenny alone. All subsequent attempts ended similarly, at which point Kenny County's family filed a missing persons report with the police, indicating that he may be being held forcibly at the country ranch, a home crematorium, and gruesome findings. When police arrived at Sheila's home, she claimed that the young man no longer lived with her and claimed that Kenny had run away because his mother, whom he was allegedly terrified of, began visiting them frequently. As evidence, Sheila provided an audio recording in which she asks her lover if his own mother had attacked him, and he quietly gives an affirmative answer. It all seemed more than strange, and the very next day, an officer visiting Sheila secured a search warrant for the estate. Sheila had been on the police's radar many times before, and her name had been linked to another mysterious disappearance of a boyfriend. But over the years, Sheila had never been questioned, and her house and grounds had never been searched. When the police arrived, they did not find Labar at home, but they did see several fires burning near the outbuildings. The fires looked strange and were made of improvised materials, a mattress, fragments of wooden furniture, hay, etc., all doused with a flammable mixture. One of the bonfires had bones in it that clearly looked like human remains. The squad requested reinforcements in the form of forensic experts reporting all the findings, but that turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg compared to what they discovered next. Almost all over the house were found poorly washed traces of blood. It was so much that it seemed as if there had been a real massacre. It turned out that the blood belonged to at least 3 different people. The bones smoldering in the fire belonged to the missing Kenny, and there were 2 empty fuel cans lying nearby, the same ones the boy had bought at the local store the day before. But that wasn't all. Also found on the property were the remains of Michael DeLoss, who had disappeared a few years earlier, and some fingers of some third guy who was never identified. Among other things, a large number of items belonging, judging by the size, to various men were fished out of the sump at the ranch, the fates of which have not been learned. The hostess herself was not at home at the time of the police visit. She had figured it out and gone on the run. Sheila hitchhiked to Boston, where she obviously hoped to get lost. Moreover, on the way, she seduced one of the drivers who gave her a ride, and he trustingly invited her to live in his house. However, the next day, having seen on TV news about the search for a dangerous criminal, the new lover himself called the police and reported that Sheila is now in his bed. It was there that she was arrested. During the search of Sheila's home, another frightening find was made: a box of videotapes. On the tapes, Hanny Michael and several other men confessed to horrific crimes. But judging by the guy's appearance and condition, they made these confessions under torture. Since Labar's arrest, her mental health has raised a lot of questions, so the court ordered the necessary evaluations. Sheila was found to have a delusional disorder as well as signs of schizophrenia. She called herself an angel sent from heaven to protect children from rapists. It was Sheila's failing mental health that became the basis on which her attorney tried to build a defense. He called his client a profoundly sick person and tried to prove that she was not aware of her actions. The reason for this was the mental and physical trauma she had suffered as a child. The defendant herself claimed that many years ago, when she was in that terrible accident and found herself in a coma on the verge of death, she met with God, and the latter told her to cleanse the world of men who infringe on children. Sheila's ex-husbands and some of Sheila's lovers also spoke in court who, in one voice, called her a crazy, unstable, and extremely violent woman. And Wayne Annis, the third husband, said that the ex-wife repeatedly persuaded him to kill Mr. Labar in order to seize his property. But despite the defense's attempts to convince the court that Sheila was insane and in need of treatment, it was proven that she was aware of her actions at the time of her crimes. She was found guilty in July 2008 and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of ever being released. All of her appeals were rejected. Sheila is now serving her sentence in Florida at Homestead Correctional Facility. The incredible case of Michelle Whitaker. Michelle Laurel Whitaker was born on August 16, 1969, as the fourth of 5 children to her parents. According to her mom, Laura Andrews, Michelle was extremely close to her entire family. However, this changed when they moved from Illinois to Gastonia, North Carolina, and Michelle's once happy demeanor began to fade. As she entered her teenage years, part-time as a waitress and was barely getting by. One evening in 1999, Michelle met a man named David after her shift ended, and he offered to give her a ride home. Michelle accepted, but soon regretted her decision. Instead of taking her home, David took her to a secluded area where he assaulted her and forced her into intimate contact. He was arrested a year later, pleaded guilty to assault and battery, and received an 8-year prison sentence. Just before she disappeared, Michelle was arrested for driving under the influence of alcohol. Michelle's parents decided it was time to take drastic measures. They contacted the police and asked them to hold Michelle in custody until a spot in a rehabilitation center became available. Although it was a difficult decision, her parents felt it was the only way to help Michelle in her situation. However, Michelle became extremely upset by this, and from that point on, her relationship with her mother significantly deteriorated. Unfortunately, Michelle was mistakenly released from jail without receiving the court-ordered treatment for her substance and alcohol abuse. On August 5, 2002, Michelle had an argument with her mother and stormed out of the house in a bad mood. 3 days later, the man she was staying with contacted her mother, Laura Andrews, to inform her that he couldn't find Michelle after they had had an argument. This is how Laura learned of her daughter's disappearance. Laura immediately sought help from a friend who worked at the local police station. But the police, familiar with Michelle's lifestyle, advised her to wait a little longer, assuring her that Michelle would likely show up on her own. However, 2 weeks passed, and Michelle failed to return home. On August 21, 2002, Laura filed an official missing persons report, and local law enforcement began investigating Michelle Whitaker's disappearance. During their investigation, they discovered the last place Michelle was spotted, a truck stop. This information came from a local resident named Doug, who had met Michelle by chance on the street the day before she disappeared. Doug recounted that he had stopped his motorcycle outside a bar where Michelle was sitting and struck up a conversation with her. Michelle told him that she had had a fight with her boyfriend, and he had thrown her out of the house. Later that evening, they visited 2 bars together, playing a few games of billiards at one of them. They then took a ride on Doug's motorcycle until dawn, after which they went to his house. Thus, it was revealed that Michelle Whitaker had spent her last evening visiting local bars, and Doug was the last person to have seen her alive. This made Doug the prime suspect in Michelle's disappearance. According to his testimony, Michelle had planned to go to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, a resort city on the Atlantic coast, where she hoped to earn good money working in local bars and restaurants. Doug claimed that he dropped Michelle off at a truck stop, but only after giving her some clothes, including a t-shirt and shorts, and some money to buy coffee and newspapers. He said he wished her good luck before leaving. To verify Doug's story, the police gave him a lie detector test, which he passed. They also tested the man Michelle had been staying with before she vanished, but found no evidence to suggest he was involved in her disappearance. The police began to consider the possibility that Michelle had actually gone to Myrtle Beach, which is approximately 250 miles from Spartanburg. A few more weeks went by, but there was still no sign of Michelle. Her family and friends were growing increasingly anxious. Despite her anger and resentment towards her parents, they couldn't bring themselves to believe she would abandon her family and go into hiding. Michelle's prolonged disappearance made the local sheriff question her motives. When people travel for extended periods, they typically take some personal belongings with them, but Michelle had left with almost nothing. Moreover, she had a beloved pet dog to which she was deeply attached. Every detective interviewed agreed that Michelle would never willingly abandon her dog. In the meantime, Michelle's parents began driving around the neighborhood, hoping to find any clue that might lead them to their daughter. After receiving multiple tips that Michelle had been spotted on a beach in North Carolina, they headed there immediately. They spent 3 days searching for her, posting flyers and talking to locals, but their efforts ultimately proved fruitless. After 6 months of unsuccessful searches, Laura Andrews started questioning whether her behavior towards her daughter had been right. She had witnessed her daughter's downward spiral and couldn't just stand by. Laura wanted to protect her in any way possible. Additionally, she suspected that the 1999 brutal attack Michelle suffered might have contributed to her disappearance. Laura couldn't forgive herself for the hurtful words she spoke to Michelle after the attack. Despite the assault being a terrible act by a stranger, Laura initially blamed Michelle for taking a destructive path and causing harm to herself, which only damaged Michelle's self-esteem further with her words. From the sheriff's office, it was assumed Michelle had motives to escape due to her reputation. Detectives thought she'd eventually be arrested, but a year passed with no results. The police were alarmed that Michelle left no digital traces, which wasn't a good sign. Both police and family wondered if Michelle was a crime victim, possibly falling prey to a truck driver, but this theory remained unsubstantiated. 2 more years passed with no leads. On the 3rd anniversary of Michelle's disappearance, after police and Laura Andrews visited the truck stop where Michelle was last seen, local TV stations revisited the story. Just days after Michelle's story aired on TV news, the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Office received a strange letter. The anonymous letter, handwritten on a small sheet of paper, claimed to reveal the location of Michelle Whitaker's body. A crude, homemade map accompanied the letter, pinpointing the exact spot. Despite its amateurish appearance, the letter was well written and proper, lending it an air of credibility. The sheriff, accompanied by search dogs, embarked on a search of a rural area 25 miles from where Michelle was last seen. This development came 3 years after her disappearance, and her family was torn between despair and hope. Some had reluctantly accepted that Michelle might be dead, while others clung to the possibility that she was alive and safe. The search dogs were unable to detect any scent, and the operation was eventually called off. Although relieved that nobody was found, the investigators remained perplexed by the letter. A handwriting analysis and DNA evidence from the envelope suggested that the author was a woman, but her identity remained unknown. In February 2006, Michelle's parents relocated to Rock Hill, South Carolina, which is 65 miles from Spartanburg. A year later, on the 5th anniversary of Michelle's disappearance, the whole family gathered at the church. Michelle's mother, Laura Andrews, did not want to treat the gathering as a memorial service because Michelle's body had not been found, and there was still a faint hope that she might be alive. Another year passed, and Detective William Gary took over the investigation of Michelle's disappearance. At the time, he was handling a dozen unsolved cases, including Michelle's. Since many years had gone by without any evidence that Michelle was still alive, her case was considered a felony. The lack of evidence led the investigators to believe that something tragic had likely occurred. As the 6th anniversary of Michelle's this time, although the news was welcome, a family reunion was not possible at this point. Josephine Depard, called Josie by her friends and family, was going through a transitional period at the beginning of 1984. The 26-year-old had separated from her husband and was preparing to go to family court with him to settle custody of their 6-year-old daughter Lois following the separation. Josie had to move back into her mother's home on North Clinton Street in Olean, New York. While this was a setback for Josie, it was not a completely upsetting turn of events. She and her mother, Lois Catoni, were very close, as evidenced by the fact that Josie had named her daughter in honor of her mother, the oldest of 7 children. Josie was very close with her siblings as well. Josie had also begun taking classes at Jamestown in hopes of starting a career that could provide her daughter with a comfortable life. On the evening of February 7th, Josie left home at approximately 5 p.m. She was with a male acquaintance from the nearby town of Franklinville, whom she knew through the community college. The man, Dale Varican, was never publicly identified by police until February 2018. Josie supposedly was going to Dale's house so that they could swap stereo components. Josie never returned to the home on North Clinton Street. According to Dale, he and Josie had changed their plans, not going back to his house, but instead to the nearby Olean Center Mall. The two got coffee, and Josie ran into some friends. He claimed that Josie left with these friends, and the last time he saw her was at approximately 6 p.m. Dale was obviously heavily scrutinized by police assigned to Josie's case. None of Josie's known friends or acquaintances came forward identifying themselves as the people Josie went off with, and no witnesses placed Josie or Dale at the Olean Mall. There have been rumors of witness statements placing Josie at a Perkins restaurant later on the night of February 7th with a group of unidentified men, but police have never been able to substantiate these claims. As far as investigators have been able to ascertain, Dale was the last person to see Josie before she vanished. Dale's behavior immediately after Josie's disappearance did not do anything to quash suspicions about him. Right after Josie went missing, he reportedly tried to flee the country. He was stopped at the Canadian border and charged with a parole violation and marijuana possession. He was then sent back to the United States. Dale committed suicide a few months later, in October of 1984. Dale's suicide was a setback in the investigation into Josie's disappearance. While they had no proof that he had harmed Josie, both his behavior at the time of her disappearance and his background made him a person of interest to police. In 1981, Dale had been sentenced to 2 to 6 years in prison for 2 sexual assaults that took place in 1979. One of the victims was just 14 years old. Erican received credit towards his sentence for the 6 months he had spent in the county jail while the charges were pending. The remainder of the time he had been in custody had been spent in a mental health facility following a suicide attempt in his cell, and that time was not eligible to be used as time served. Despite these mental health issues, a psychiatrist who evaluated Dale testified at the 1981 trial that he had been able to distinguish between right and wrong at the time of the attack on the 14-year-old. It has been speculated that Dale's history of mental health problems was the reason police did not release his identity until February 2018. While police remain skeptical about Dale's claims of innocence, he is not an official suspect in Josie's disappearance, and he was never charged with any crimes in relation to it. With a major avenue of inquiry cut off so soon into the investigation, Josie's case had few leads to follow. Her case remained active, but police never came closer to solving the mystery in the intervening years. That all changed in February 2018. On February 7, 2018, the 34th anniversary of Josie's disappearance, an anonymous letter arrived at the Ali M Police Department. The letter, addressed to Captain Robert Blafsky and retired officers who had worked Josie's case, has never been released to the public out of concern that doing so may jeopardize the investigation. Captain Blafsky has stated that the letter contained some information that he already knew as well as some information that he had speculated but never been able to verify. In an attempt to get the writer of the letter to come forward, the Aliam Police Department posted an appeal on their official Facebook page and received cooperation from local media. Captain Blafsky has stated that while they would like to speak with the letter writer, that person is not in any trouble. The letter does not implicate the writer of the letter in Josie's disappearance. Blafsky also told the local television station that the information in the letter has investigators looking for 3 other individuals. Although he could not identify them, Josie's brother, Dominic Catoni, has also publicly expressed hope that the person who sent the letter would speak with police further. According to the Ali and police, 8 or 9 people came forward with information about Josie's case as a result of the publicity garnered by the letter. As of August 2018, the identity of the letter's author remains a mystery. Josie's family is aware that after 34 years, it is most likely that she is no longer alive. They would, however, like to locate her body so that they can give her a proper funeral and bury her next to her beloved mother. Josie's ex-husband, who was in California at the time of her disappearance and therefore never a suspect in the case, eventually remarried. Josie's daughter Lois was legally adopted by Josie's sister Eileen Payne and her husband Dana a few years after Josie went missing. Lois, now Lois Payne, grew up in Strongsville, Ohio with the 3 brothers she gained upon being adopted. As an adult, she had a daughter of her own. Gladis Kid was a grandmother living in Moorhead, a small town in Rowan County, Kentucky. Gladis had been married for 49 years, but her husband Stella passed away in 1983. She was an active member of her church. In 1990, Gladis sold the remaining half of her farm. She had sold the first half of it back in 1988. In the August, she went to the People's First Bank to cash a $56,000 check she had received from the sale. Despite warnings from the bank staff, she insisted on taking the full amount in cash. After August 6, 1990, Gladis Kid was never seen again. The only things found to be missing from Miss Kid's home were the cash, a filing cabinet, and some clothes. She parked her car in town and left it there with the keys inside. 17 days after Miss Kid was last seen, a letter postmarked in Lexington, Kentucky arrived at her son's home. The letter instructed her family not to look for her and said that she would leave again if they found her and forced her to return home. While this letter seems to indicate that Miss Kid disappeared voluntarily, it has not been determined that she wrote it willingly. Miss Kid's family believes that she was the victim of foul play and that she had been forced by her killer to write the letter. The note was her killer's way of preventing an investigation into her disappearance and protecting himself from being caught. The family's concern stemmed largely from a mysterious boyfriend who had been a part of Miss Kid's life for the last few years prior to her disappearance. A few years after her husband's passing, Miss Kid began corresponding on the phone and going on secret dates with a man that she refused to identify to anyone in her life. When calling Miss Kid at home, this man would hang up the phone if anyone besides her picked up. Despite multiple family members pressing her for details on this man, Miss Kid would always refuse to reveal his identity. All she would ever say was that he was a man known to the family and that they would be surprised when they did find out who he was. The secrecy around this relationship caused many people close to Miss Kid to warn her to end it. According to a letter to the editor in the Norhead News written by Miss Kid's granddaughter, Sandra Nathanson, her family believed this man to be a predator. She further implied that this boyfriend was the reason that the proceeds Miss Kid earned from selling the first half of a family farm in 1988 mysteriously vanished. If this boyfriend had been using Miss Kid for money, he would have had no use for her after receiving the proceeds from the sale of the second half of their family farm, Having taken all of Miss Kid's assets, this individual could have seen her as a liability once she realized her boyfriend's interest in her was purely financial. Miss Kid would no longer be willing to conceal his identity. She therefore may have fallen victim to foul play to protect both her boyfriend's ill-gotten financial gains and his reputation in the community. The family's belief that Miss Kid met with foul play is supported by the fact that after she disappeared, she stopped collecting her social security checks and her driver's license was never renewed. Furthermore, her car was left in Moorhead. If she left town, someone else would have had to drive her. As no one else went missing from the area at the time, she clearly did not run off with her boyfriend to start a new life together. As of February 2018, Miss Kid would be 99 years old. Even if she did not meet with foul play at the time of her disappearance, it is unlikely that she would still be alive today. As her family does believe she was murdered in 1990, they are still searching for answers so that the person who took her from them can be brought to justice. They had her name engraved on her husband's tombstone in the Crick Cemetery in Moorhead in hopes that one day she can be laid to rest next to him. Jalik Rainwalker's life was an uphill battle from the very beginning. Born addicted to crack cocaine on the floor of his biological grandmother's Albany, New York kitchen in August of 1995, he was also diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome shortly thereafter. As a result, he was removed from his biological mother and placed into foster care 2 days after his birth. Jalik spent the first several years of his life going from foster home to foster after living in 5 different homes. He was lucky enough to eventually be placed with Jody and Larry Shohan at age 3. The couple cared for Jalik for 4 years and had plans for adopting him. However, Jalik's difficult beginnings would derail this bright future. Jalik had been diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder, a condition that can develop in children whose emotional and physical needs were not met early on in their development. The condition can have a wide range of psychological and emotional symptoms. Broadly speaking, children with this disorder cannot properly accept affection once they are finally given it. They have trouble asking for help, are severely withdrawn, and respond to affection and interaction in inappropriate ways. In addition to his R.E.D., Jalik's fetal alcohol syndrome may have contributed to his behavioral problems. FAS, which is caused when a child's mother consumes alcohol during her pregnancy, can result in a broad range of physical and psychological complications. Children with this syndrome often have learning disabilities, poor reasoning and judgment skills, and hyperactive behavior. Any of these effects could complicate management of his R.A.D. The Shohans have described Jalik as a loving and bright child who loved to read. Unfortunately, his psychological conditions did make caring for him difficult. When he became frustrated, Jalik was prone to violent episodes, where he was essentially unmanageable for up to an hour. The Shohans spent 4 years helping Jalik try to live a normal life. However, when Jalik was 7, he attacked the Shohans' biological daughter. At that point, Jody and Larry decided that they were not equipped to manage Jalik's condition after all and decided not to continue with their plans to adopt him. After leaving the Shohan home, Jalik was sent to live with Jocelyn McDonald and Stephen Kerr, a married couple with 4 biological children and another foster child with special needs. 18 months later, the couple adopted Jalik, along with his foster sister. Jalik's life with McDonald and Kerr was somewhat unconventional. Their rural home in Washington County, New York, was a 2-room shack with no electricity, running water, or indoor plumbing. This was reportedly done out of the couple's concerns for the environment. All of the children were also homeschooled rather than sent to traditional school, although they did participate in small homeschooling groups with other families. McDonald and Kerr did not provide any care for Jalik's special psychological needs. During the time he was with them, he was not receiving any sort of counseling or put on any type of medication. This is in spite of the fact that they received roughly $36,000 a year from the state to provide for the care of their 2 adopted children with special needs. McDonald's own mother has publicly stated that while she believes her daughter and son-in-law began fostering children for the right reasons, they eventually were drawn to caring for children with special needs because of the additional income they provided. Jalik's problems again came to a head in February when he reportedly threatened a small child in the homeschooling group he and his young boy had been pestering Jalik, who had not been able to properly express his frustration and had instead lashed out with a threat of physical violence. Following this incident, Jocelyn McDonald no longer wanted Jalik in her home. Therefore, on February, Stephen Kerr called a crisis hotline. He told the caseworker he spoke to that Jalik was unmanageable and that he wanted to reverse the adoption. The caseworker told him that this was not possible. It in fact would have been possible to have Jalik removed from his family, but when Stephen hung up the phone that day, he believed that he had no legal means to remove Jalik from his home. At this point, Kara McDonald decided to take advantage of what is known as respite foster care. In respite foster care, a child is temporarily sent to live with a different licensed foster family during times when they are having difficulty with the family they have been living with. The break allows both the child and their families an opportunity to take a break and evaluate how best to improve their relationship going forward. On this occasion, Stephen Kerr took Jalik to the home of Elaine and Tom Person, who have provided respite care for Jalik since he had been 7. As respite care is only a short-term option, Jalik only stayed with Elaine and Tom for 6 days. When Steve and Kerr picked Jalik up from their home on November 1st, he told them that Jalik would be going to another respite foster home the following day. However, Jalik was going to have to stay with him for the night. Because Jocelyn still did not want Jalik in her home, Stephen took Jalik to his own parents' home on Hill Street in Greenridge, New York. Stephen's parents were out of town at the time, so Stephen and Jalik were alone in the house. The following morning, just before 9 a.m., Stephen Kerr called the police to report his son as a runaway. According to Kerr, he had awoken at 7:30 a.m. on November 2nd and been unable to locate Jalik. He found a note from Jalik that read, "Dear everybody, I'm sorry for everything. I won't be a bother anymore. Goodbye, Jalik." Kerr believed Jalik to have been wearing blue jeans and a bright yellow fleece pullover when he went missing. He also stated that Jalik's duffel bag and his favorite stuffed animal had gone missing as well. Jalik's parents were only cooperative with authorities in the very early days of the investigation. They were interviewed by police on November 4th. On November 6th, Jocelyn McDonald complied with the request for her to take a polygraph examination, which she passed. On the same day, Stephen Kerr took the introductory portion of a polygraph but declined to complete the examination. The couple retained an attorney the following day. Kara McDonald held 2 vigils for Jalik, one on November 9th and one on November 16th. The latter vigil marked the last public showing of support for the search for Jalik by his parents. Stephen Kerr reportedly ripped down many of the missing persons flyers posted by volunteers and described Jalik as evil after he went missing. Concerns about Stephen Kerr's version of events sprung up almost immediately after Jalik went missing. Elaine Person, Jalik's respite foster mother, says that one of the assignments Kerr gave Jalik when he left him with her on that final stay was to write letters of apology to the people he had hurt. This included the students in the homeschool group where he was no longer allowed. While Elaine did not see the letters Jalik wrote, her husband Tom did see Jalik writing them. She believes the note Stephen Kerr gave the police was one of those apology notes. If Kerr knew what this note was, why did he misrepresent it to the police to support the idea that Jalik had run away? In February, Stephen Kerr was named a person of interest in Jolie's disappearance. According to authorities, they had video surveillance footage showing a gold minivan consistent with one Kerr owned driving through Greenwich around midnight when Kerr had claimed he was sleeping. Furthermore, cell phone data showed that Kerr had not taken the route to his father's home that he had detailed in his interview with police. The duffel bag and stuffed animal Kerr said Jalik had run away from home with were found inside the garage of Kerr's parents' home. Another contentious layer of the mystery of Jalik's disappearance was added in February when a typed letter was mailed to several media outlets in the area where Jalik went missing. The poorly written letter claimed that Jalik was still alive. The only real detail that seemed to validate the letter was the reference to a cat named Diamond, which Jalik did have when he was living with his adopted family. The police accepted the letter as a lead, but those close to Jalik believe it to be a cruel hoax. According to Elaine Person, Jalik was too intelligent to have written such a grammatically incorrect letter. Compared to Jalik's handwritten letter given to police by Stephen Kerr, it certainly is at a much lower level of sophistication. In their investigation into the letter, police executed a search warrant on Stephen Kerr's father's home to take a computer into evidence. They were not able to determine if the letter had been written on that computer. Stephen Kerr and Jocelyn McDonald filed a lawsuit against the police department shortly thereafter, alleging that the search was improper and that police had illegally detained them during it. For months after Jalik went missing, his adoptive parents moved their family out of state. Greenwich police have been publicly very critical of Karen McDonald's lack of interest in their son's case. Chief George Bell of the Greenwich Police Department has stated in an interview that he has never seen such a lack of interest from the parents of a missing child. Kara and McDonald do not contact the authorities to check in on Jalik's case. While Jalik's adoptive parents have not displayed an interest in this case, others who love him have stepped up to fight for Jalik. Efforts to locate Jalik have been led largely by his adoptive maternal grandparents, Barbara Reilly and Dennis Smith. In the wake of Jalik's disappearance, when their daughter and son stopped cooperating with authorities, Reilly and Smith attempted to gain legal custody of Jalik so that they could expedite the investigation through their own cooperation. This move was without legal precedent in the United States and was ultimately unsuccessful. As a result of their involvement in Jalik's case, they have become estranged from their daughter and grandchildren. Soon after Kara and McDonald stopped cooperating with the police, Reilly and Smith helped form a task force to facilitate the search for their grandson. Also on the task force were Jalik's former foster parents, Jody and Larry Schoen, and Tom and Elaine Person. Elaine took a leave of absence from her job managing a small nonprofit to lead the task force and focus on efforts on Jalik's behalf full-time. These efforts included searches, media outreach, and fundraising to create a reward for information in Jalik's case. While Kara at McDonald did initially post a $25,000 reward for Jalik's return, it decreased by $5,000 every month and therefore was gone quickly. The task force relied on activities like bake sales and spaghetti dinners to raise funds for a new reward. A local deli offered a free weekly lunch for life to the person who could claim the reward, and a local business owner donated a $250 gift card to Walmart. While this pieced-together reward may not be large monetarily, the efforts made by the community to put it together are valuable beyond measure. Barbara Reilly's work on behalf of Jalik further chipped away at the validity of Stephen's account of Jalik's disappearance in February. As part of her own investigation, she decided to search the abandoned home site Jalik's family had been living in before they moved away. There, she found the yellow fleece pullover that Stephen claimed had gone missing with Jalik. Police, acting on Riley's discovery, searched the home and removed a piece of clothing from it, although they did not disclose if it was in fact the yellow police. In response, Jocelyn McDonald had her mother arrested for burglary. In February 2012, state and local authorities held a press conference to announce that Jalik's case was being reclassified from a missing persons investigation to a probable child homicide. At the conference, they also finally confirmed that Jalik's yellow fleece had been recovered after he went missing and announced that they had just performed a new search with cadaver dogs based on a tip from the public. The search was unsuccessful. Jalik's adoptive parents did not attend the press conference. Barbara Reilly and Dennis Smith instead represented their grandson. Speaking through their lawyer, Karen McDonald expressed confusion at the reclassification. They still held their belief that Jalik was alive, having run away to live with a black family. Jalik was biracial, half African American and half white, and grew up in a county that was over 90% white. He therefore had few people around him who physically resembled him. Reconciling the two halves of his racial identity probably was difficult for a young boy with no real connection to one of those halves. McDonald and Kerr have stated that Jalik identified as black rather than biracial and probably ran away to live with other black people. It is understandable that Jalik would seek out black role models. However, the notion that he could have made his way to a more diverse area, much less remain hidden there for so long, at his age and with no resources, is essentially incomprehensible. Upon the reclassification of Jalik's case as a probable homicide, the authorities did not name any official suspects. However, as the last person to see Jalik, and the person whose account of events has faced so many challenges, Stephen Kerr falls under a cloud of suspicion for many. This includes Barbara Reilly, who bases her concerns on Kerr's history of anger management issues, which twice necessitated therapy. She alleges to have once witnessed Kerr become so angry with Jalik that he dragged him outside of their rural home and repeatedly dumped him in a nearby creek. If Kerr were involved with the foul play that Riley believes took her grandson from her, she does not think that it was a premeditated act, but rather an impulsive act of rage. Even though authorities believe Jalik met with foul play, there are mixed opinions as to whether anyone could be convicted in relation to his death. Locating his remains would obviously make such a conviction much easier. When a partial skull was located in the area of Jalik's disappearance in the February, many hoped that Jalik could be laid to rest. Unfortunately, tests showed that the skull did not belong to the missing boy. A few of the investigators who have a more complete knowledge of the case than the public have stated to the media that they believe that there is enough evidence to successfully get a conviction in the case. However, until Jalik's remains are found or more witnesses come forward, it is unlikely that he will receive justice. Bernard Ross Jr., known affectionately as Bunny, was 18 years old and living in his family home in Fort Kent, Maine in 1977. On the morning of May 12th of that year, Bunny was in a state of extreme emotional distress. Some reports indicate that he had been taking the antipsychotic drug Thorazine at this time, but there is little supporting evidence for this claim. What is known is that on that morning, Bunny left his family home in his parents' car without asking permission to use it. The car was later found at the home of his aunt, who lived roughly an hour away in Presque Isle, Maine. It is possible that Bunny had driven to the house in hopes of speaking with his cousin who also lived there. Bunny and his cousin were reportedly very close. While the Ross family car was unexpectedly found at Bunny's aunt's house, another vehicle was unexpectedly missing from it. On that day, a painter had been working inside the Presque Isle home. His truck went missing from the driveway outside of the house. It was later found undamaged along a dirt road in Ashland, a town west of Presque Isle. It appeared that for unknown reasons Bunny had abandoned his parents' car and stolen the painter's truck from his aunt's driveway. Prior to this incident, Bunny had no criminal record. As best as his family and investigators can tell, this was a move purely made out of panic. When the painter learned of Bunny's emotional state at the time he appears to have taken the truck, he declined to press charges in the matter, meaning that Bunny's record remains clean. Bunny has remained missing since May 12, 1977. There were unconfirmed sightings of him in wooded areas around Ashland around the time he went missing, but extensive searches by law enforcement and the Ross family have never turned up evidence of his whereabouts. Bunny's status as a missing person in the Maine State Police database led to him being featured in the Maine news media throughout the years. 39 years after Bunny went missing, news coverage would help lead to a major development in the case. In February 2016, Bunny's parents, Bernard Sr. and Carol, were living in Portland, Maine. Early in the year, they received an anonymous letter from someone claiming to have information about what happened to Bunny. The letter indicated that the writer had seen a recent article about Bunny in the Kennebec Journal and suggested that the paper run another story about the case. The Rosses took the letter to the Maine State Police. Ultimately, in May 2016, Maine State Police Lieutenant Troy Gardner decided to contact the media about the letter's existence and arrange for Carol and Bernard to be interviewed by the Portland Press-Herald. The exact contents of the letter had not been released to the public, so as to protect the integrity of the investigation. Lieutenant Gardner's desire to increase media coverage in the case had a dual purpose, to both reach out to the letter writer and increase public awareness of the case. While the information in the letter has not been verified, Lieutenant Gardner feels that it is important for him to speak with the letter's author. He indicated in his own interview with the Press-Herald that the cooperation with the media was meant to be an olive branch to the person who sent the letter. Lieutenant Gardner believes that speaking to the individual who sent the letter is necessary to either verify its contents and move the case forward or show that the letter is a hoax and close off that avenue of investigation. Even if the letter is merely a hoax, the Ross family deserves to know. The family has now endured over 4 decades of searches, sleepless nights, and requests to look at John Does from all around the country in an effort to learn of Bunny's fate. Learning if the letter is authentic or not will at least answer one of the millions of questions that must have plagued the Ross family since they lost their son all those years ago. Whether the letter is factual and moves the investigation forward or is a terrible joke, Hopefully, the attention it has garnered will one way or another bring closure to Bunny's case. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.